The cafe breathed with a low, constant murmur, the kind that settled into the bones if you sat still long enough. Late afternoon light filtered through the wide front windows, turning dust motes into drifting sparks and warming the wooden tables to a soft glow. Mark chose a corner table near the glass, not because it was the best seat, but because it felt safer there, less noise behind him, fewer eyes passing too close. He had learned to measure rooms that way since becoming a single father, always aware of exits, always counting the small things that could overwhelm a tired child. Lily sat across from him, legs swinging gently under the chair, her shoes tapping the metal rung now and then in an uneven rhythm. She was bent over her coloring book with complete concentration, tongue tucked between her teeth as she filled in the petals of a flower. Mark watched her for a moment longer than necessary, memorizing the way her brow furrowed when she tried to stay inside the lines. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, letting the heat sink into his palms, grounding him. He hadn't meant to come here today. The cafe had been his wife's favorite place, the one she loved for its quiet music and cinnamon-scented air. For a long time after she was gone, Mark avoided it entirely. But Lily had asked, softly, hopefully, and he had said yes because saying no too often felt like another kind of loss. The door chimed as someone entered, letting in a rush of cooler air and the faint sound of traffic outside. Mark barely looked up at first. People came and went constantly. But then he noticed a pause in the flow of movement, a subtle hesitation that didn't belong to the cafe's usual rhythm. She stood just inside, balancing a tray in her hands. She was young, younger than Mark expected, maybe still in school, her face smooth but her eyes older than her years. Her dark hair was pulled back simply, a few loose strands brushing her cheeks. One leg ended above the knee, fitted with a prosthetic that reflected the light when she shifted her weight. She stood very straight, like someone determined not to take up more space than necessary, even as the room forced her to navigate between tightly packed tables. Mark noticed the way people reacted, most without meaning to. A man leaned back a little too far in his chair to give her room. A woman glanced, then quickly looked away. Someone else stared openly, curiosity unmasked. The girl's mouth tightened, just a fraction, but she kept moving. She scanned the cafe, eyes flicking from table to table. Full, full, nearly full. Each time her gaze dropped, it was as if a small weight settled onto her shoulders. Mark recognized that posture. He had seen it in his sister years ago, after the accident, when she learned how to carry both her body and other people's expectations at the same time. The girl stopped in front of his table. She said, her voice soft but clear. Can I sit here? The question was simple. There was an empty chair. There was no rule against it. Yet the air between them stretched thin as Mark hesitated, his mind racing ahead of his heart. He thought of Lily, of how children absorbed everything without realizing it. He thought of the tiredness etched into the girl's face, the careful way she stood as if ready to retreat at the smallest sign of rejection. He thought of his sister's tears, years ago, when she came home from a bus ride and locked herself in her room. The pause lasted only a second, but it felt longer. The girl noticed. Her eyes flickered, and she shifted her weight, tightening her grip on the tray. It's okay if not, she added quickly, words tumbling out as if rehearsed. I can find somewhere else. No, Mark said, the word escaping him too fast, too sharp. He saw her flinch and immediately softened his tone. I mean, yes, please, sit. Relief crossed her face so quickly it almost hurt to see. She nodded once. Thank you. She maneuvered the chair with practiced ease, setting her tray down before easing herself into the seat. Up close, Mark noticed faint scars along her knuckles and wrists, pale lines that told stories without words. She adjusted the hem of her jeans automatically, a small, habitual gesture, then folded her hands in her lap. Lily had stopped coloring. She stared openly now, not at the prosthetic but at the girl's face, curiosity bright and unguarded. Hi, Lily said. The girl smiled, a real one this time, the corners of her eyes crinkling. Hi, what's your name? Lily asked. Aisha, she replied. What's yours? Lily. That's a pretty name. Lily grinned, pleased. She glanced at Mark as if to make sure this was allowed, then slid her coloring book closer to the edge of the table. I'm drawing a flower. Aisha leaned forward slightly. Can I see? Lily turned the books as she could. Mark watched the exchange quietly, something warm and unexpected spreading through his chest. Lily didn't see a difference to navigate, a discomfort to tiptoe around. She saw a person who had sat down at their table. That's really nice, Aisha said. I like how you made the petals different colors. I like it better that way, Lily said seriously. Flowers aren't all the same. Aisha nodded. You're right, they aren't. Mark cleared his throat. I'm Mark, he said. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too, Aisha replied. She picked at the edge of her napkin, her eyes drifting briefly around the cafe, as if she was still half expecting someone to tap her shoulder and tell her she didn't belong there. Mark saw the tension in the set of her jaw, the readiness to gather her things and leave. You come here often? He asked, not because he needed to know, but because silence felt like something she might mistake for judgment. Sometimes, she said. When it's busy, I mean. It's easier. Easier than what? She hesitated, then shrugged lightly. Easier than being the only one people notice. Mark nodded. He understood more than he could put into words. Lily went back to coloring, humming softly under her breath. The sound settled the space between them, turning it from something fragile into something shared. Outside, a car passed, then another, the world moving on in its indifferent, constant way. Inside the cafe, at a small table by the window, 3 strangers sat together, unaware that this brief, ordinary moment was already reshaping something quietly inside them all. Lily finished coloring the last petal with careful precision, then lifted the crayon and studied her work like an artist deciding if something was truly done. She tilted her head, considering, before adding a small yellow circle in the center. Satisfied, she pushed the coloring book aside and gently slid the page out, holding it up between her fingers. Do you want it? She asked, turning toward Aisha. Aisha looked startled, as if she hadn't heard correctly. Me, Lily nodded, earnest and certain. Yes, you can have it. For a moment, Aisha didn't move. Her eyes dropped to the drawing, then lifted back to Lily's face, searching for hesitation or conditions that weren't there. When she finally reached out, she did it slowly, carefully, as if afraid the offer might disappear if she moved too fast. She took the paper with both hands. It's beautiful, she said quietly. Her voice wavered just enough to betray what the moment meant to her. Thank you. Lily smiled and returned to her seat, swinging her legs again as if she had just given away something ordinary instead of a small piece of her heart. Aisha stared at the drawing for a few seconds longer than necessary. Mark noticed the way her shoulders rose and fell with a deep breath, like she was steadying herself. She folded the paper once, then stopped, unfolding it again as if she couldn't bring herself to crease it. Can I ask you something? She said at last, looking at Mark. Of course, he replied. When I asked to sit here, she said slowly, choosing her words with care, you paused. It wasn't long, but I noticed. She offered a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. People always do. Mark didn't interrupt her. He had learned that sometimes the kindest thing you could do was let someone finish. I don't blame them, she continued. I know it's awkward. People don't want to say the wrong thing, or they don't want to stare, or they don't want to deal with this. She gestured vaguely toward her leg, then dropped her hand back to her lap. I just always wonder what they're thinking in that moment. Mark took a slow breath. The cafe noise seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the weight of her honesty. I was thinking about my sister, he said. She lost her leg years ago. Different situation, but the looks were the same. The pauses. The way people decided things for her without asking. Aisha's eyes lifted, surprised. What kind of things? Where she could sit, whether she needed help, whether she was strong or fragile. He shook his head slightly. She used to say the hardest part wasn't the pain. It was feeling like she had to earn her place everywhere she went. Aisha's throat tightened. She nodded once, sharply, as if he had named something she carried but rarely spoke aloud. So why did you say yes? She asked softly. Mark glanced at Lily, who was now lining up her crayons by color, humming again. Because no one should have to ask permission to exist, he said. And because my daughter is watching me. I want her to grow up knowing that kindness isn't something you debate. It's something you do. The words hung in the air between them. Aisha pressed her lips together, trying to hold herself steady. Her eyes filled, shining dangerously. She let out a short, breathy laugh, shaking her head. I wasn't expecting that, she said. I'm sorry if it's too much, Mark added quickly. No, she said, wiping at her cheek as a tear escaped anyway. It's just, no one's ever said something like that to me before. Lily looked up, concern flickering across her face. Are you okay? Aisha nodded, though another tear slipped free. Yes, sometimes crying means something good happened. Lily considered this, then reached across the table and placed her small hand over Aisha's. You can sit with us anytime, she said matter-of-factly. That was when Aisha broke. Her shoulders shook as she leaned forward, pressing one hand over her mouth, trying to keep the sound of her crying quiet. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just deep and honest, the kind of tears that come when something heavy finally loosens its grip. Mark stayed where he was, not intruding, not retreating. He simply remained present, steady, the way he had learned to be for Lily on nights when grief came unannounced. After a moment, Aisha drew a shaky breath and straightened. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to." "You don't need to apologize," Mark said gently. She wiped her eyes, then looked down at the folded drawing still resting on the table. "Most days," she said, voice quiet but clear, "I feel like I have to prove I'm not a burden. Like I need to be extra polite, extra strong, extra invisible." She looked up at him. "Sitting here, being asked my name, being offered a drawing, it feels like being treated like a person again." Lily squeezed her hand once more before letting go. "You are a person," she said simply. Aisha smiled through fresh tears. "You're right." They sat together for a while after that, not rushing to fill the silence. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. The café continued its gentle chaos around them, cups clinking, voices rising and falling, but at their table, there was a calm that felt almost sacred. When Aisha finally gathered her things, she stood carefully, adjusting her balance. She hesitated, then tucked Lily's drawing safely into her bag. "Thank you," she said, meeting Mark's eyes. "Both of you." Mark nodded. "You're always welcome here." As she walked toward the door, her steps were steady, her shoulders a little lighter than before. Lily watched her go, then turned to Mark. "Daddy?" she asked. "Yes. I'm glad she sat with us." Mark smiled, his chest full. "Me too." Outside, the door chimed as Aisha stepped back into the world, carrying with her a folded piece of paper, and the quiet knowledge that sometimes, a simple yes can change everything.